I guess maybe I should start over with my name, right? Dr. Amit Dominic, Texas Prisons Community Advocates, founder and president of that organization. We're most known, of course, for the air conditioning issue. I mentioned earlier that I'm joined with Janet Delk, who will be doing a brief training on storytelling. Also today, we have Heather Rainwater, who is an influencer, advocate, mom, and we also are joined by Jessica Dickerson, same thing. So these individuals, and one of the reasons why I'm really happy to have them present, well, all of our panelists present, is because they're family members. They're impacted family members, just like the majority of the people who are signing in to this training today. And as impacted family members, it's oftentimes an intimidating process, right? To deal with legislation and bills, and there's just a lot of stuff that just kind of goes with this whole bill process. So I'm going to start us off by talking a bit about the bill process. Hopefully, when we do have another panelist, hopefully Ms. Gina Castaneda joins us as she is actually a lobbyist and was hoping to bring us some of her pearls of wisdom. So I'm just going to jump right in. And like I said, if you have questions, then please go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll try and monitor those. We may not get to all your questions today. Some of these things will be covered as we just go through the training. But I'm hoping that we have a little bit of a conversation with the whole process. So I'm going to start with talking about the Texas session bill process. Now, I know we have, you can go to the next slide, Megan. I know we have people here from other states, but a lot of the nuts and bolts of dealing with politics is the same no matter what state you are at, right? It's just a matter of finding your resources, and those resources are going to be a little different depending on the state that you're actually in. So we're going to talk a little bit about the session timeline, some helpful websites, the bill process, and of course our TPCA supported bills and ways that you can take action. Next slide, please. And I'm going to try and move through it very quickly. It is a lot of information, and those of you who are part of our Facebook group, I hope to get this posted out. Hopefully you've seen some of our previous trainings on the Texas legislative session, and you can utilize those resources. So don't feel like you have to, know everything that just gets shoved down your throat and warp speed. Okay, it takes a while to get this process under belt. So starting with the fact that Texas has already started their legislative session, right? So the 89th legislative session started on January 14th. Our legislative session meets every other year and usually lasts about 140 days. Sometimes we have what's called special sessions, and that's based on the call of the governor, what he decides are technically it's supposed to be an emergency item, but it's not always an emergency item. But he makes those decisions, and whatever bills that come through have to be subject to the call of the governor. Friday, March 14th is the last day to actually file bills. And we'll talk about that bill process a little bit later. And bills must be cleared by committees by May 8th. If they're not cleared by May 8th, they're probably not going to make it. They're probably going to die either in calendars or whatever committee they're in. Monday, June 2nd is Sin D. That is when session is over. It's whatever bill hasn't gone through, it's dead, and you will have to have a whole nother bill number for the next session. There are 150 House members, and there are 30, I think there's 32, I think I have a typo there, Senate members. So right now where we're at in terms of session, and you can go to the next slide, Megan, is the Senate has already chosen their committee members. So those first 30 days or so are typically them just kind of getting organized and choosing their committee members. And then after that, we get into our, a lot of our hearings. Now the Senate is already up and running. They've already chosen their committees. Senate Finance is already meeting, and they've gone through almost all of their articles at this point. The House, on the other hand, we've got a new Speaker of the House, so they're moving a little slower. We were hoping to have answers today, but those answers didn't come through. So once we get those answers, I'm fingers crossed that it's supposed to be tomorrow, I'm told, then we can move forward and know a lot more about where these bills are going to land. So how do you find and track these bills? That's the first place I want to start. And in fact, I think what I'm going to do before I even get there is I'm going to share my screen, and yeah, we're going to do this, I think. And hopefully we're seeing TLO, right? Are we seeing that on the screen? Good to know. So this happens to be my site that I like checking. There's and there's there's a couple of sites that you can just track your bills. This happens to be my favorite. Why? Because it has all the information I need, and it tends to move a little faster than one of the other ones that I'll highlight. What you can find here is you can do a number of searches. You can track your bills. You can do it by bill number. You can do it by key phrases. You can set up bill alerts. Those are some of the things that you can actually do with this site. So for example, and you want to also make sure you're on the correct year when you're doing this. So if I were to just go criminal justice, and hopefully I spelled that right, we can see all the bills, right, that are filed under that heading. Maybe I don't want to do it this way. Maybe I'm just interested in a particular committee or a particular bill author. And those are ways that I can go back to my home screen and I can search by my committees. I can search by my members. I can search by particular bill authors. I can also set up my account here, my TLO. And with that, I can create bill lists and alerts so that I constantly know when new bills are being filed. Right, especially if they're in a subject area that I'm very interested in. So that's TL. That is the gist of TLO. Another site that is oftentimes used is Legiscan. I just don't find Legiscan to be as user friendly. There's a paid level of Legiscan that I typically don't like using, but it does pretty much the same thing. You can set up bill alerts. It's just got a different layout too. To it. So those are, things you definitely want to have in your back pocket. Ballotpedia is another one that I like quite a bit. And I think this is really useful when it's an election year because it'll tell you who's been elected. It'll tell you things like who their donors are. A lot of great information on this site. Another site you want to be familiar with, two main sites. And I know I have slides for this, but I think it's probably a little bit more user-friendly to go through it this way. This is our Senate site, so senate.texas.gov. This is where you're going to find a list of the senators. This is how you can reach out and connect with them. So I'm just going to click on one. I can find out a little bit more information about Senator Hughes here. I can email Senator Hughes here. I can find out where his district offices are, what committees he's on. Sometimes they have it updated where you can find out what bills he's supporting. So that's just a little bit of information about the Senate site. The House site works very similarly. They've changed the complete look on us this year. So for the House site, and that's house.texas.gov. We've got 150 House members, and this is where you're going to find them. I'm just going to click on one so you guys can get an idea about your House members. What bills have they authored? What bills are they co-authoring? What bills are they sponsoring? Where are they located at in the Capitol? And where are their offices at? Their district maps. So we can get a lot of that information here. Also for the House site, we tend to use this a lot more for the hearings themselves. So this is another thing you want to familiarize yourself with, those live broadcasts. And they also have the archive broadcasts that you can access here. And so my panelists, anybody, you guys have navigated these. Anybody want to comment on either of these sites? Do we have a favorite? Anybody want to chime in?
I prefer TLO, and I do set up a lot of alerts. And the nice thing about that is the alerts come to your email as well. So you'll get a little message that says, this bill is moved or this bill has been assigned to committee or in your email. So you don't have to keep checking the TLO site all the time if you set it up for an alert.
Yes. And that's what I like about it too. So I usually at the beginning of the year, I go through and set up all my alerts. And the other thing you have to know is with every new session, they'll wipe all your alerts. So with every new session, you have to set it up again. So that's something you want to definitely notice. Anybody else want to comment on either one of those sites? I think we can go back to the slideshow, and I'm going to move through it a little quickly because I do really want to get to the storytelling part of this. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is, here's a couple of other ones that I didn't mention. The quorum report is another, it's a subscription base and the thing about the quorum report that's nice is it kind of gives you the tea. Pretty much, who's doing what, why have they not, chosen committees, things like that, that the quorum report is pretty helpful with. Telecon, I don't personally use that one. And then we've got the Texas Legislative Reference Library, which is helpful for just knowing things such as the important dates for session. And they have like a lot of basic information about the legislative process. You can go to the next slide, please. That's helpful on that site. A little bit about the bill process itself. Before we get into some of the storytelling. So legislative process in Texas, that's that link that I just mentioned a little while ago. There's a couple of key stages. There's design, there's drafting, there's submitting the bill, there's first reading, and then there's when a bill is sent to committee. And I feel like I'm missing part of my picture here. So design can happen a number of ways. Design happens outside of session. Design happens by talking to your legislative members and basically giving them a concept to start with. And then the next level to that is you might want to give them something a bit more detailed, like a resolution statement. And then from there, they're going to send that bill off to that language off to drafting, or which sometimes is called Leg Council. Leg Council right now is extremely backed up. So there are several thousand bills that are still waiting. They're still pending. So there's going to be a major bill drop happening probably in the next few weeks. And Leg Council is literally telling the political members that they need to get whatever they want in within the next couple of days, essentially. Yeah, if not, it's just not going to make the cutoff because they're not going to be able to go over the legalities of the bill in order to file it. Filing actually started back in November, first filing, and it's usually the first 60 days of regular session where we're still filing. Once the bill is filed, it is then sent to a committee via either the lieutenant governor or the speaker of the House. Once the committees are formulated, then the committee chair decides on what bills will actually be heard in committee. We can do the next slide, please. So this is one of those slide pictures. And, Jessica, you had sent me a new picture for this, and I think I found the right one.
It looks familiar.
I think this is the right one. This isn't the one I typically use, but I liked it because it kind of looks like a board game, and it just gives you an idea of all the different steps that these bills actually go through. So when you're hearing organizations talk about how difficult it is to get a bill through, well, this is why. Right? This is only part of the why. These are all the different stages. This is how easily it is to kill a bill. So at any one of these stages, that bill can die. Right? It can not be referred to committee. It can make it to committee and have a hearing, but not have and not make it out of that hearing. It can die in calendars. It can die on several different places. So this is where our advocacy as grassroots organizers becomes incredibly important. This is why you're going to hear from us things like phone zaps and Twitter storms to get you all involved in this political process. Because we need you to be calling your senators, we need you to be calling your representatives and saying, hey, I want this bill heard. I want this bill heard in committee. I want this bill to make it out of calendar. I want this bill to make it to the governor's office. Those are things that we rely on you all to actually do, because the politicians are bean counters, right? Anytime you're calling down there, that has to be recorded. And the more phone calls that they get, the more letters they get, the more emails they get, the more likely we are to have some level of movement in terms of getting our bills passed and not having them die on one of these various levels. And I'm moving a little faster than I typically do, but I'm moving this way on purpose, because I want to be able to have time to answer some of you all's questions. So I'm going to just ask, as I'm going to throw this to our panelists a little bit, because you guys, both Heather and Jessica, last session was your first session, kind of walking those halls and talking to these legislators and finding out about where the bills can die. And I wonder if either one of you want to chime in and talk a little bit about that process and what it was like for you all to have to learn some of the nuances of this process.
Well, I'll take that first. So for me, it was my very first experience going to the Capitol as anything other than a visitor. And I did have the blessing of shadowing you, Dr. Dominic, through this process. I know you asked me if I was going to sign up to speak, and I was like, no, not that first time. And it was very helpful to follow you from the rooms where there was testifying going on to individual offices and see how you interacted with the people in there. And I would recommend that. I wanted to point out that, we've heard from President Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address that our government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. But what that means is we don't elect somebody every 2 to 4 years and then we're done. That means we follow the issues that are important to us, and we have to reach out to our legislators and tell them this is important to me and here's why. Because that's the only way they know what the people who elected them, think. So I would say the very first basic step would be learn who your senator is, learn who your representative is. These links here, the Ballotpedia is great for that. You just put in your address and it will tell you who they are. Plan to visit the Capitol, either when testifying is going on. It's a really great way to see how it goes. You become less intimidated by seeing everybody's just a person. We all stumble over our words sometimes, but they listen to us. And shadow someone. We have had over 4,000 bills filed this session alone. Mm-hmm. And as Dr. Dominic said, those bills are not, they're not all going to make it. So this is why it's very important that we're jumping in right now. Now's the time that we start taking action. Jessica, what would you have to say about all that?
Last session was my second session up there. So I felt a lot more comfortable because I had a little kind of an idea. First of all, how the building is laid out, it can be very confusing. So definitely get a map when you go through the front door and figure out where the subfloors are versus the main Capitol Rotunda spaces, because otherwise you'll be walking miles and miles. So have a plan when you go in to say, I'm going to start in this section of the building, and all of the rooms that are S something or other are going to tell me their sub, and then east versus north versus, and it's all labeled, and then kind of outline that, because otherwise you'll end up walking so many miles that you'll get tired and decide not to visit all the people you intend to, because you'll be zipping all over the building. It's a large space. And it can be a little confusing. So make sure you talk to the people at the door or the officers that are stationed throughout to get directions. For me, I prefer office visits. I prefer walking in and speaking to people face to face. But when you are testifying, you do only get 3 minutes. So you really need to have your thoughts concise and really outlined very quickly to hit the points that are important to you. And if you have a chance to talk to, if like TPCA has a team of people there, and find out, hey, what points are you hitting, so that, there's an opportunity to hit kind of different things. A lot of times we kind of check with each other in the hallway when we find out who's going to be there, and just say, hey, what are you, what are you going to talk about? Because I'll talk about this and this. Because everybody has their thing, like I like to talk a lot about the emotional toll that the conditions place not just on incarcerated people, but on their families. And I'm very focused on children. So I kind of hit it from that direction. But then a lot of our medical staff likes to hit from the medical perspective. So we all have an opportunity to kind of hit this conversation from the area that matters to us most, or to the area that affects our particular loved one, specifically. And so being able to make that conversation personal makes a big difference. They do have to look us in the eye. We do hire them. They do allege to work for us. So when you go into the office of the individual who is your representative, your legislator, your senator, make sure you tell them, I am your constituent from San Antonio. I live in your district, because that's going to give a little bit more weight to what you have to say, knowing that you have the power to mobilize people to vote them out. That's really, really helpful. And then TPCA does a fantastic job during session of putting out the phone zaps and things like that. So when you're looking at that and you say, hey, we need to call the Senate Finance Committee because that's where these bills are going. Oh, look, there are 6 or 7 Finance Committee members. One of them happens to be mine. Then you call your family members who live in that district too, and you say, we all need to send this email. We all need to make this phone call, because it has more weight when you're calling somebody that's your specific representative or senator. Of course, we want to call everybody because numbers matter. That there's a power in numbers. But when it can be your person, every single time that these bills have a problem, it's in the Senate, and it's in Senate Finance, and that's run by specific individual. Last couple of times that's been a senator out of the Houston area, and we have a large number of people who live in the Houston area. So there's a real big opportunity in that moment to, use that, hey, I'm your constituent conversation to get them to really hear your voice.
Thanks for that. I kind of I took a break from the actual training part, so I guess we should get back on track with the second reading. The second reading takes place after we've got out of committee and we voted it across the floor. And now there's a second reading where members can change their votes if they would like to. Most don't. And then if we've got about 2/3, the majority comes, we adopt. And then it moves towards the other chamber. I'm gonna, can we backtrack a little bit, Megan, on the slides? Right here, thank you. So what I want to point out here that I didn't mention earlier is the bills have to go through both chambers. So that means, for example, if we start a bill over here in the House, it has to go through all the different stages in the House to get through the Senate, and then it's rinse and repeat. Then everything happens all over again. So when Jessica was mentioning that we typically get caught up in the Senate, that's what's happened with our House bills, particularly for air conditioning. Representative Canales has been filing this bill since, when did we start? 2019 was the first one. And we've got it across the House floor twice now. However, it's gotten stalled in the Senate because it's been referred to Senate Finance. Senator Menendez has filed this bill. He was the first one since 2019. And what happens is his bills get stuck and that we don't even get a hearing in the Senate. We haven't even gotten a single hearing in the Senate. So except for Senate Finance, that's another option. And that's probably a whole nother training.
And the sad thing about that is that when you go into those offices and you talk to the senators, you find that a lot of the senators support air conditioning, but it never gets to the vote with them. So we have that potential if we can just get to the vote part.
I think we can move on through the slides. Oh, I wanted to mention the fiscal note just a little bit. That's one of our challenges, particularly with the air conditioning bill. So LBB is who evaluates the finances and the budgets for any of the bills that come through for state-run agencies. They assign what's called a fiscal tag to your bill. In other words, how much is it going to cost for this to happen? We're down to, like, last session, we were down to 1.1 billion for the air conditioning alone. Those numbers are overinflated. I believe they're overinflated. However, that's where they're at on that. We should be a little bit lower than that, given that the few units that TDCJ did put air conditioning in. However, they've taken some of their idled units and they've put those back online. So we might run into a different problem with that. And then I mentioned earlier that, you know, each bill gets filed, a new one gets filed every session. We can go to the next slide. All right, so let's say we make it through both chambers. The bill gets enrolled and it gets sent to the governor's office. And the governor either signs it and it becomes law, the governor vetoes it, or he just lets it ride and then it becomes law. Because without a signature. So if he were to veto it, there's a small window of time where our political officials, if they have 2/3 of the vote, they can bypass his veto. That's probably the easiest way to put that. Next slide. Okay, so people are already asking in the chats about some of TPCA's bills, and I put the air conditioning bills in there, and I'm gonna stop here and I'm gonna let Janet come on and talk about some of the storytelling components, because I think we already started getting into that just a tad bit, and then we'll come back and talk about TPCA specific bills.
Okay, well, I'm over here. My audio was off, but I was singing "I'm Just a Bill on Capitol."
I know, that's the best one. Thank you for bringing that up. So I've got to tell everybody here, still, if you want to understand the bill process, that is still the best thing going. Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill. Thanks, Janet.
There you go. Okay, so let me share my screen for you guys. Okay, so are we good? Are we seeing me?
Yes.
Okay, well, everybody, I just wanted to say I am not as politically versed as Jessica and Dr. Dominic and also Heather. I have been brought here to just to give you a little bit of training on how to tell your story, how to get across to these legislators what you want to get across, how to make your impacts. And that's where I guess they believe my expertise is. So this is the bulk of what you're going to get here from me. So we'll give an overview of what I'm going to do. We're going to talk about part 1, which is how to effectively advocate through storytelling. Part 2 is ways to advocate with storytelling. And then part 3, some other considerations you should have. So part 1, how to effectively communicate through storytelling. The first thing is to choose the right story. So you should select a personal experience that powerfully illustrates the issues you're advocating for and highlights challenges, but not only the challenges, but your potential solutions. So with our climate bills, you know, if you're going in to tell your story about how your loved one is suffering through this heat, you need to also end those stories with what they should do, which is, again, pass a bill, give money, put air conditioning in there. So you want to just choose that right story. And then you want to know your audience is really important. So you want to tailor your story so that it resonates with specific groups that you're trying to reach. You would not tell the same story you may not tell the same story the same exact way, let's put it that way, the same exact way that you're going to tell to your legislators that you might do at church or that you might do at a community advocacy event. So you want to make sure that before you go in to this to the storytelling, that you know who your audience is, and consider their values and their perspectives, and most importantly, their level of understanding. So the level of understanding that your legislators may have, what you might be talking to is, you know, maybe their fiscal responsibility regarding this. Whereas if you're going into some community event, it might be a little bit different, that a little bit of different story that you'll be telling. And the next portion is structure your narrative. What does this mean? This means everybody knows what a story is. A story has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. Sometimes when you go up to a podium, you may get a little nervous. Sometimes when you're standing in front of a group of people, you might be a little nervous and you might do a little rambling. I do that often myself. So one of the things you want to make sure you do is first make sure in your head that you have those clear storytelling arcs, with the beginning, which is where you're going to introduce your situation, your middle, which you're going to describe your conflicts, and your end, which is again is going to highlight the resolution and the impact. I can remember when I testified for the first time in front of TDCJ board. The one thing I was nervous as all get out, and the one thing that Dr. Dominic said is, make your person a person. So when you introduce who you're talking about, let the people you're talking to understand that it's not just an inmate or an incarcerated person. Bring them in some way to make that person human. I'll tell you what I did. I brought a picture, not a picture of his mugshot. I brought a picture of when we were kids together. So that the image that they have in their head when you're telling your story is not the criminal, is not the inmate. You need to find some way to make those connections. And how are you going to do that? You're going to use vivid details and emotions. You need to incorporate all those sensory details, the personal things that happen to you, so you can create a strong connection with those listeners. One of the things that I talked about in that testimony, and I guess the reason that I'm here is because that testimony went a little viral. One of the things I talked about is a story that my loved one told me about the hottest day he ever experienced. And that was on a ship because he was in the Navy. And some of those details that I put in there was that he told me that if you stopped walking, your boots would melt to the ground. So if you imagine that imagery that you're giving to somebody when you're saying that it's so hot that rubber melts instantly. And then the impact of that is in the end when I said, what was worse? And he said, TDCJ, because on a ship, I can breathe. So again, you brought that imagery in there. I brought that imagery in there of not being able to breathe, of suffocating because it was so hot, that you would rather be in the middle of war on a ship in 140-degree heat than in that cell without air conditioning. So those are the things that you need to incorporate into your stories. And then you need to focus on the why. Once you get those emotions in there, you need to tell them why this issue matters to you, but most importantly, why it should matter to them. That's the point. That's the connection that you need to make, because all along it's always somebody else's problem. So you need to figure out that way to connect the matter, the issue to them, and why it's important why it's important to them and what they can do. And then once you get to that point, your next area is to include that call to action. You need to clearly state what you want your audience to do, what you want that person to do after you told your story. You know, if you're advocating for a nonprofit, it could be donating. If you're advocating for our audiences here, it's to contact the representative. It could be raising awareness. And then when you're talking to your legislator, it could be pass that bill. Or when you're talking to TDCJ, it's understand what's happening. At the end of my testimony, I challenged them to go into the mock cell. I gave them something that they should do. And that's what you need to leave them with. So that's how to effectively advocate through storytelling.
I want to interject for a second.
Mhm.
I want to hear from our panelists. And I think Jessica alluded to this a little bit. When she talked about making sure that they knew that they were that she was their constituent, right? But there has been a different story approach from different people. And I'm thinking about two things. Jessica, I'm thinking about your experience with talking to the political officials when you're there present at the Capitol. And Heather, I'm thinking about how you've had to tell a story, but it's typically been arranging meetings outside of the Capitol. So I want to start with Heather on this in terms of what's your hook, what's your story, or just give us some nuts and bolts of that story so that hopefully it can help our audience members to find their options. Did we lose Heather?
So for me, I started advocating over the air conditioning issue. And I am listening to you, Janet, and realizing, I don't know that my story, I don't know that I've ever actually shared a story. I have shared facts, which even the facts that I have shared with my legislators, they're astounding. 70% of housing units in the Texas prisons have no air conditioning. In Texas, when we see every summer people dying on the streets in Houston, they're not even locked up. So and I'm a super emotional type of person. I do this, and I'm not Italian, but you wouldn't know that. I just very animated when I speak, and I come with a document, 1 to 1.5 pages that I hand to my legislature, and I go over it. I go over, okay, these are the facts, these are the details. So I really was thinking when you were talking, I need to develop a story.
I'm going to push you a little bit, Heather, because I've heard you tell the story. But I've heard you tell it in the context of a training, and also some of the meetings you were able to get. You work with us with dealing with, individuals who are incarcerated, their letters. Maybe you can allude to a little bit of that.
Yes, and you all, you're just going to have to give me a little bit of grace, because as far as speaking on these issues, getting close and personal with them, it's been a little tough for me lately. So yes, I read letters, and that I did take copies of letters from some of the folks that had asked for help. This was back when I was working on the letters teams, which, by the way, if anybody in this training is able to do frontline work, we can use assistance in responding to some people who really need some assistance that don't have outside help. But I shared their stories. I shared what they wrote to me, and only with their permission, of course. But is that what you're referring to, Dr. Dominic?
Yeah, a little bit about that, and how, because I've heard you talk about how impactful those stories were for you.
They were so impactful that I ended up having to go to counseling and realizing that I couldn't get that close to it. That's how powerful these stories are. And just like Janet, what your loved one said, that it was hotter at TPCA than having his boots melt on the deck of a ship. I mean, I cannot personally to handle those kind of details. And I think that's impactful to my representatives when I speak to them, that it does something to me, and it does something to them, because nobody wants to see somebody come in their office and start crying, right? And I can't not cry. So I apologize right now, but
No, that's okay.
But it is important for these legislators because they are insulated from the reality of the decisions that they're making. And they're making decisions for Texas citizens, incarcerated citizens, and all of the family members attached to them. So it's justified for there to be a certain amount of emotion connected to the fact that they get to stay in their little bubble of separation emotionally from the choices that they're making. And sometimes we really do have no choice but to hopefully help them completely feel. And you may start off emotional at the beginning of the day, and then you get a couple of responses from these people, and you will have some righteous anger like you've never felt before. By the end of the day, Dr. Dominic is usually like, you're getting a little feisty. And I'm like, I can't keep my mouth shut another moment. If I have another one of these individuals blame the citizens of this state for the decisions that they're making, if I have another one of these senators tell me my constituents don't want this, and you need to understand that they don't take responsibility for the torture that they're putting our loved ones through. They blame you.
Yeah, that's true.
Over and over again, they blame the people of their districts for the decisions that they're making, and we cannot allow that anymore. So if they see me angry, if they see me upset, if they see me emotional about it, yeah, because that's all the things I feel.
And
I try to be respectful because you don't want to get kicked out, but
Right.
I'm okay with them feeling, and I've had some office individuals be really condescending. He was half my age, and I wanted to speak to him like I was his mother. I actually think I did kind of speak to him like I was his mother.
A little bit.
But you know, we are talking about torture of other human beings, and there's no easy way to discuss that without there being a mental load carried with that, which is why it takes all of us involved, because we all have to take some time to walk away from this. So Heather, good for you for knowing when you needed to as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to bounce this back to Janet, that Janet's presentation was an emotional one. And since we're talking about emotions a bit, emotions aren't, it's not a bad thing to display them. We do want to not cuss them out though, preferably. You know, we do want to not go in there yelling and screaming and being out of sorts. There's a way to approach them. You want to be as professional as you possibly can. If you have facts, you bring the facts. But I will tell you, your story is the most powerful part of that. Janet, you want to go ahead and continue?
I do, but I do want to piggyback off of that a little bit and say one of the things that I did when I told my story is that I listened to other people's stories, and that's what you can do also. So in my story, if you go back and you read it, I pulled other people that I was listening to into that story. I talked about somebody's son, and I talked about somebody's daughter. And when you talk about, when Jessica said just now, you need to let them know it is not, that they have to take some responsibility. One of my, as Dr. Dominic said, hooks, one of my hooks was a judge and a jury sentenced my loved one to prison, but you have sentenced him to death. And when I said that, they all looked up at me. And I can tell you in the end, at least one of the board members came up to me and said, I heard you. Now that's been almost a year and a half ago. So when I speak again and I see this board member, I'm going to go to them and said, I think you listened. I don't think you heard me, because nothing's changed. But you know, those are the things that you need to remember. And if you can, again, it's as Heather said, it is such an emotional thing that sometimes you have to disconnect yourself from it. But if you can find some way, not just to connect you with it, but to connect them with it, that is going to be how you move forward. Jessica and I spoke at I'll go to this next one in a second, but Jessica and I spoke at a panel at a university.
St. Edward's.
At St. Edward's. And the last question that they asked all the panel members was, what do you think, what needs to change? What needs to change to make change happen, or something of that nature was the question. And everybody gave their legislative thoughts, what needs to happen. They came to me, and it was a panel with a bunch of students. And I said, you need to change. We need to change you because you're the change of the future. And at that point in time, there was silence. And I knew that in some way that touched somebody. And if you can touch one person, again, this is grassroots. If you touch one person with your story, you never know how far that can go. I didn't know, I had no clue. We'll go on this, but I had no clue that my story went as far as it went. It was Dr. Dominic that called me one day, or we were on a meeting, and said, hey, did you hear how many people watched your story? I was like, what are you talking about? So anyways, those are the things, those are the hooks, I guess, hooks that you need to do. We say hooks, but I do want to say, when we say hooks, we're talking about, you'll see this going on further, but authentic hooks. You need to be
Yes.
truthful with what you're doing. So,
And that storytelling isn't just legislatively, it isn't just the board. That's with the people at church, the neighbor down the street. You have no idea, like 42 to 45% of all Americans are directly connected to someone that's been in prison or jail. A lot of us have had this experience on some level, but people don't want to talk about it. And so when you do, it gives that voice and that power to other people to be able to speak as well.
that's very good, Jessica. And that's why one of the other campaigns that Dr. Dominic was trying to get off the ground, I'm Affected, is a very important one. Because there's such a stigma regarding these issues. If people just feel connected in some way to know that they are affected, everybody's affected by what's going on, then maybe it brings it forth. And so there's that. But so the next part is just part 2, ways to advocate with storytelling. We've talked right now about what we do with public speaking. And, that is, of course, the big arena for you to go into when you deliver your story in a live setting, using, body language, as Heather said, impactful body language, the way you deliver, the words you say. You can do these things in legislative sessions, in boards and committee meetings, in churches and community events. But there are many people who would rather have bamboo shoots shoved underneath their fingernails rather than publicly speak. I've heard them say this before. I felt this before. So I just want you to know there are different ways to tell your story. It doesn't always have to be in a public setting, although that is the big part. That's the place where you might be able to get the most impact. You can also have written narratives. Dr. Dominic is always making calls for op-eds that you can send to newspapers. But outside of op-eds, you can do blog posts, you can do articles, you can do personal essays. You can put those things out there. And video testimonials. If you can't do it live, just take a video of yourself. You can tell your story in that way. If you're just feel like you need to be in this intimate area, this intimate session where it's not around everybody else, you can tell your story like a video diary. And you can do that video diary, and then you can use that video diary to circle back around to this last one, which is social media. This is our biggest platform right now. This is where we actually could also use, Dr. Dominic has put out a call to anybody that knows how to navigate social media, that we could use this. But right now, utilize those platforms. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, share your story. Take that video testimony and put it on there. Go on to TikTok and just, tell your story. Take these tips that we've shared here. And if you can't do it in public, just do it right there. And then it can still go out to the world. And you never know how many people it's going to touch. As we just said with my testimony that went before TDCJ, I didn't know it would go, what was it, like 100,000 or people that looked at it at some point in time. It was just crazy. So those are other ways for you to advocate in areas if you can't do public speaking. And I want to pivot on this a little bit, because you can use these stories when you are sending your letters to your legislators. When we're talking about written narratives, we do have standard letters that you can do, but it means so much more when you put something meaningful and impactful to yourself. You can do this over the phone when you get one of your legislators or whoever their advocates or representatives are. You can do it that way also. So it's not just standing in front of a crowd of people if that is not who you are. I would challenge you to try to do that because it might be easier than you think. But otherwise you can do some of these other things.
Yeah, I'm gonna
It is
interject for a quick second here. Heather, that is one thing she started doing just on her own. Heather, you want to talk to us a little bit about your TikTok adventure?
Okay, yes, I did jump into the TikTok world because I think that that's the platform. I could be wrong. Probably by now, everybody's old on TikTok, but I don't know. I think TikTok is still a pretty powerful platform. And I did just start making little blurbs about different areas. You know, it started with the heat. I did the 7-minute challenge. Is that what we call it? What do we call it? I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
7-minute challenge. And after that, just anytime I felt like I wanted to get something off my chest, I would just start shooting the TikTok. And true confessions, y'all, I kind of stopped. I stopped in this past June. My son died in the Ellis unit. And I have not been able to really get back into my advocacy the way I was. And I don't have it right at the moment. It's in there, but I just can't do anything about it. So TikTok, I would start out doing a little 2 or 3 minute video. And then the next thing I know, I'm doing 10-minute videos and people are watching them. And I'm like, why? Why are you watching 10 minutes worth of my videos? But people are interested, you know? So tell your story there. Who knows? I think the thing that it's not TDCJ, actually the video that got the most watches of everything I've done was when I gave them information about how to navigate between access corrections and Securus at Dallas County Jail. And any kind of thing you can do to start building an audience that will listen to you about things to do with criminal injustice in the state of Texas, just jump on and try.
You just got the gumption to go ahead and do it, and you made it happen, right?
Yeah.
This from the person who wasn't comfortable about testifying, right? But then went all on her own and started her own TikTok, and you know, now that's why I get to call her an influencer. because of some of what she's doing. Janet, you want to take the ball back?
Sure. And that's what I'm saying, that storytelling doesn't have to be something that makes you uncomfortable. It can be find your platform, find your voice is the best way to put it. Your voice may not be verbally. It may be written. It may be that social media. It may be TikTok. It may be telling somebody how to navigate access corrections and Securus. That may be what it is. But once you get that following, then they may at some point in time listen to your other story. So that's the important part of it. And part 3 of this is other considerations. So this is what we're talking about. Be authentic. Share your genuine experiences and emotions, and that will build trust with your audience. You don't know what you're going to say that's going to connect. You just don't. So I'm going to share one thing right here, which is when I do the tours in the mock cells that we have, one of the things I didn't realize resonated so much with people is when I tell them at the back of our mock cell, there, one of the places in the back of the mock cell, Dr. Dominic puts up a letter and a card and a picture. And I tell them, this is what for a long time, kept our family members going. You know, not just, you know, you need to realize it's not just men and sons, it could be mothers, and to get a card from their child and hold it and feel connected to them. And then I say, but last year TDCJ stopped this. And they're no longer able to have that tangible piece of home from them. And I tell them how that made my loved one feel. The fact that he can't just pick up a piece of paper and realize that I wrote something to him, that it came from my hand, that I gave it to him. I'm sorry, Heather, now it's going to be me a little bit.
Mhm.
When you share those experiences and those emotions, when you are authentic, then I think you build a relationship and you build a following. And that's where some of the connections need to come in. So moving forward, again, I'm going to use you, Heather, is respect boundaries. Because if your story has some sensitive topics, just be mindful of those triggers. And you need to, this is for you, Heather, you need to prioritize your well-being as long as others too. So that's the thing. When you're in your storytelling, if there's a time when you have to take a step back, like you said, do that. There's a storytelling, when we talked about at the beginning, know your audience. If you know in some of those audiences, there may be something more traumatic, maybe step back on your story a little bit. So those are things that you'll learn the more you tell. And then practice your delivery. I can tell you, my son, who is back there, has heard this training like 17 times already. Just, I got on Zoom right now. It was just me on the camera and I was just talking. Nobody else was there. And that's what you might have to do. When I did my testimony to legislation, not sorry, to TDCJ, I had it on index cards in front of me. And all throughout the whole day, I was just repeating it in my head, repeating it in my head, repeating it in my head. There are some people that are, in our technology generation here that can put it on your phone. I mean, it looks better if you don't read it right off of there, but if you need to have something in front of you to remind yourself, Heather said that she hands out her one-pagers to people when she gets there. If you need to have those in front of you, have those in front of you. But the more you do it, the easier and more confident it becomes, and the more impactful it becomes. So there is that. And then
everybody has their comfort space. Like,
Yeah.
I hate testifying. It's 3 minutes. I would rather stand in front of a college group for 3 hours and talk and communicate and receive information and share than to stand for 3 minutes and give a monologue. Like, it freaks me out. It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. It's just never going to be a thing I feel comfortable doing. But I have no problem walking into offices or standing in front of a group full of college students or anything like that. So everybody's going to have their thing that they feel comfortable. But I still challenge you to do it. Dr. Dominic's like, you going to testify? I'm like, meh. I'm gonna sit behind you. It hasn't gotten easier for me in that, like, as far as the nervousness of it. That's just one, it's just an area for me. Like Heather, I challenge myself to do TikTok videos, but for some reason, talking to a blank screen versus talking to other human faces is just harder. So yeah, sometimes you're going to have to challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zones.
Two things I want to throw in there. One, the general thing they say when you're presenting in front of people and you get nervous, because it's gonna happen. Everybody does it. You might stumble over your words. It probably will happen. You're probably going to mess something up. So you have to give yourself permission to be okay with that. But what I was always told in like speech classes years ago was picture everybody you're looking at that they're in their underwear. And that's supposed to be the great equalizer, right? But if you see them in their underwear, then they're suddenly not so intimidating. And when we're dealing with political officials, it is intimidating. I mean, it just is what it is. When you're in a committee hearing, they're above you. That's done on purpose. They're kind of scouring down at you. You feel like you're in the principal's office. It's done on purpose, but your story is valuable and you have to really grab hold of that. You have to, like Janet said earlier on, it's about that why. And that why will push you past that fear. And that's all you can hold on to. It's about your loved one and what they're going through and visualizing them and realizing I'm probably gonna have to suck this up and put on the big girl draws just because I want this for my loved one. You know, my general rule of thumb, I'm gonna throw everything out Janet just said. To a certain extent, because I've been doing this for a long time now and had speech classes, but at this point, I just honestly, I pray about it. I get everything written down. I may or may not practice it because oftentimes I simply just don't have time. And then and this is just me. I just go, okay, God, it's in your hands. I'm here to say whatever I need to say. And I don't necessarily recommend this to anybody who's not comfortable with it, but sometimes that's just what happens. You know, sometimes it's just, I didn't have time to write it down. I didn't have time to rehearse it and do all the wonderful things that are supposed to be done, but just gonna do it. That's, not the best advice, but sometimes it happens. Janet?
Well, okay. Well, since you just threw all my stuff out, what do I need to know? I'm just kidding. And this is what happens because Dr. Dominic is a seasoned speaker. So, and I'm not going to say, don't give it to God. I will never say that. I will never say, I go up there and I pray and I'm nervous and I'm sweating and my, no matter what I've done, I'm in that moment. So this is just to tell you how to try to get to that other moment. So we've talked about all of the issues here. So let's talk a little bit about what Dr. Dominic is asking, which is political testimony. So there's just a couple things that you need to know. And Jessica alluded to it also earlier. You typically only have 3 minutes or less to give your testimony. So why is it important to do some of the things that we talked about ahead of time? Is because you only have 3 minutes. So if you want your story done at that moment in front of a legislator at a political testimony, these guidelines we've given you are probably a good thing to go over. Write out your testimony. As we said, if you're nervous, it's okay to read it. It's okay to read it from the piece of paper because it's more important that you're there and telling what you want them to hear. So, I've said it before, practice makes perfect. You can practice in front of the mirror, practice with a timer. I actually did that with that first testimony before TDCJ. They told me how much time I would have, and I was throwing out note cards left and right. Oh, got to do this. Let me mark out this. And it was kind of all went to the wind when I actually got up there to talk. So, and you practice with a friend. So if that makes you feel more comfortable, do that. And this is something that Dr. Dominic added that I did not do. So we want to tell everybody, you should always end with, I'm available to answer any questions you may have. And then bring, as Heather just talked about, I didn't do this either, but bring the necessary copies of your testimony with you so you can give them to the committee members. So just in case they didn't listen the first time, you can reinforce it.
Yes.
So those,
Heather did that. Heather did that at the board meeting and she had a whole spreadsheet and they said, do you have copies of that spreadsheet? And she had them in her hand.
Yep.
It was impressive, by the way, both of you. I spent that same board meeting sobbing my way through my 3 minutes of testimony, literally couldn't speak. I was crying so hard. So, 3 different versions here. They were both professional and articulate, and I just bawled my eyes out.
Hey, it's on video. I was crying too. So that's what was happening there. I was just still able to speak because as my father used to say, I might talk a man to death, but I'll never bore him to death. So I do have that. But anyway, so we're coming to the end here. Just want to know, why is your story important? So first off, I want to thank you guys all for staying with me with this. But why is your story important when you're talking about advocacy? Your story matters because it's your loved one's story and it's your story. So number one, when you're talking to legislatures, your loved one may not be able to vote. Later on, they maybe get their voting rights back. But at this point in time, when they're behind those bars, they can't vote and they don't have a voice in the process. So you are the voice. Here's the other thing. This says legislators don't always have all the facts. They may have those facts on paper, like what Heather said, 70% of prisons don't have this, but they don't have the fact that, I'm going to pull from my testimony, they don't have the fact that to cool down, our loved ones are putting their clothes in toilet water and laying in it at night. They don't understand, they don't know that their policies are creating that. So that's why your story is important. And if you don't make your voices heard, then as Dr. Dominic said, they're bean counters. If you don't make your voices heard, that issue is not important to them. Reiterating you're the voice for your loved one and you have a compelling story to tell. And I tell this to my staff members, you are the expert of you. You're the expert of your life and your experiences and what you went through. And you're the one that needs to make it compelling enough to matter to them. And
I want to piggyback on some of what you said, having talked to legislative offices, and oftentimes we have like town hall meetings, and I'll bring some legislators on into the group page. One of the things Representative Rosenthal had said, I think it was last session, because we have our action letters, which I really like. However, one of the things he asked for, he's like, I would prefer you guys tell me your actual story and not just use the action letter. Now, the action letters are modifiable, right? So people can add their stories. But what we found over the years is people are oftentimes they're very intimidated about telling their story. So they're going to rely on what we have on and print. But I'm going to tell you over and over and over again, I've heard from legislators, legislative offices about how important your story is. Facts we can get, right? But you, and just what Janet said about you being the expert on this, and those of us who are impacted, we all realize that we may not have been thinking about this issue until it happened to our loved ones, right? Until we became affected by it, until we became impacted by it. Before that, it was maybe, these folks are off in a prison somewhere. We don't know much about them. And the rhetoric we always hear, the narrative, don't do the crime if you can't do the time type of a thing. And then our loved ones end up in the situation. And then we go, whoa, 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 wait, somebody lied. Somebody hasn't been telling us the truth about this situation. But your legislators are hearing from the agency. And the agency is going to tell them everything is fine. Don't look over here. Don't look over here. Don't look over here. Everything is fine. You have to be that voice that says, it is absolutely not fine. I am not fine. My children are not fine. My loved one who's incarcerated is not fine right now because of your policies. That was a kind of a strong tone. I'm not sure if one of the other panelists want to jump in on that.
And by extension, that means society cannot be fine. We are all part of a collective group and community. This affects everybody. I simply did not know. I simply had no idea that there wasn't air conditioning in Texas prisons. I didn't even think, can't do the time, crime. I didn't even think, I had no clue at all. And when you're speaking in the public, you'll find people constantly, still to this day, that are just like, that's a real thing. I didn't know that's a real thing. Ultimately, it does affect everybody.
And I'm gonna piggyback off of that, Jessica, and say one of my other, Dr. Dominic's heard this before too, one of my other catchphrases, when they say, why didn't they know? I tell them, it's because of people like me. Until I was affected, I wasn't affected. I was that person. I come from a very conservative military family from the Bible Belt. I was that person that said, you did the crime, you should do the time.
Yep.
It wasn't until, and I tell them, it wasn't until I realized that the time that you were doing is endless torture that you don't know about.
Right.
You know, again, as I told them, my loved one was sentenced to a prison sentence. He wasn't sentenced to death. You did that. You know, because in my case, my loved one's been to medical last summer 3 times. How many other times will he be able to do that? And it's all because of the heat. So, so again, you are the expert.
And I would like to piggyback on what you're saying, Janet, because my son had been in and out of prison for 10 years with drug addiction issues. He never one time told me he didn't have air conditioning. I found that out through TPCA. And I asked him, I said, do you have air conditioning? No. Why would you not tell me? Mom, don't you know you have enough to worry about?
Yeah.
So any of y'all out there, if you don't, I mean, your loved ones may not tell you how bad it is.
Yeah.
All I know is my son, the last time he got out before he ended up back in, he said he would do anything never to go back again. Whatever it took, he was not going to go back in there again. It was too much. And that's not how it works, unfortunately. You know, he did end up back in there, and it's not a place to go. We've got to get it fixed. We have to take action.
And Heather, thank you for sharing that too. And I think I made a flaw there of what I said, which was, be mindful of your audience and who you're talking to. But with your story with your son, again, to those that are still on, things that you don't know, ask your loved ones about them too. I didn't know the reason that my loved one constantly got earplugs was so that the roaches don't crawl into his ears. That's a story to tell. That's a story to tell when you're there. Or that, when they were on lockdown and they were in the chow hall, they didn't have anything to do this past week when they were on lockdown in the chow hall for a couple hours, so they were just counting the rats that were running across the floor. I mean, those are things that your legislators don't know. Or don't want, let me rephrase that. Those are things your legislators don't want to know. So it is up to you to share those things with them. And that's where the story comes. So with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's a little bit of both, right? So unfortunately, things like prison related topics can sometimes be viewed as a punishment for a legislator, right? To be on those specific committees. And sometimes they don't want that punishment. They don't want to be anywhere near it. And then other times they just simply just don't know. When I first started walking the Capitol halls, I was astonished by how many offices didn't know that there was no air conditioning in the majority of the Texas prisons. They just didn't. Now they know. Now we've got a lot more, media news response. So they're a bit more engaged, but they still don't know the nuances. They don't know what Janet just said a few minutes ago about the roaches. They don't know that's when it's cold, people have had their toes bitten off by vermin. They don't know that folks aren't getting showers when it's hot. They don't know that they can't boil the water. Because the hot pots don't allow them to do that. Those things that you now know as family members, right? Those are the things that need to be communicated to our legislators. And I saw a question in here from an audience question about when is the next time we get to meet with our legislators to tell our story. You get to do it whenever you want to. Honestly, legislators are in session right now. And if I'm going to be completely honest, this is probably one of the worst times to get a hold of them because they're moving so quickly. So we end up working throughout the year, talking to legislators. Now, there is the expectation during session to speak to your legislators. I mean, they know you're coming. They're expecting the one pagers. They're expecting a 1 minute elevator pitch. That's all happening right now. So I'm going to suggest that before. I mean, I started off saying that the committees are going to be chosen for the House any moment now. Once those committees get chosen, we start moving in warp speed. So right now, honestly, is one of the best times to call your legislative offices. I want to say also, don't discount the staff. You are typically not going to speak to that legislative official. You are going to speak to the staffers 9 times out of 10. Now, if you meet them at the golf course or one of their campaign events, you might get to speak to the actual person or set up an appointment, set up a Zoom appointment. You might get to interact that way. But 9 times out of 10, that's not what's happening, right? You are going to go into an office. The staffers are going to be very polite. Oh, we're so glad you're here to talk to us. They may even offer you a bottle of water. I'm seeing both Heather and Jessica nodding. I'm a little shocked there.
They're so
And
sweet.
yeah, and then they may or may not listen to you depending on the time frame. This time of year, you may get 5 minutes with a staffer. When we're in full swing in session, they will let you talk for about a minute, maybe 2 max, and then they will start walking towards the door. We are so happy that you came to visit us today. Thank you so much. Please note that your concerns have been taken down. And
They go to special classes to figure out how to escort you gently in a smile right out the door. It's like magic.
Exactly. So, but for right now, I mean, you don't even have to. Going to the Capitol face to face is hands down the best way to connect with your legislators. Okay. Getting some type of a face to face meeting is king. Okay. After that, then we start talking about phone calls and we start talking about emails and we start talking about Zoom meetings. Zoom meetings can be kind of face to face. So that's helpful. You can schedule those if you can't get all the way to Austin. You can send the email. You can make the phone calls. What I want you to know also about the emails is they only last about 6 weeks in their boxes. So you can do email and snail mail. You can do both. I've tried them all. But Heather and Jessica, you both were doing some serious nodding there. Okay, what do we have to say?
Yes, definitely during session, it's a lot harder to speak to, but out of session, when they're in their offices in whatever city, town, district that they're in, you can make an appointment with them and then you'll actually get them face to face. And a lot of them are very responsive outside of session. So that's an option. We hit a little bit ago, Janet hit on social media, and just to let you guys know, anything that's on the private page can be screenshotted and shared as far as the memes and stuff during session, but also TPCA's public page, you can share from there just by hitting the share button. You can't do that on the private page because it's a private group. But almost anything that has to do with phone zaps or say thank you to Rep. Rosenthal for filing this bill and do that. Thank the legislators that have filed these bills for us. Make sure the whole world knows that they're standing behind our loved ones know, and that we thank them publicly. And most of the time, all of that is also on TPCA's public page, and it's an easy share button from there.
Heather, did you want to interject anything?
No, just exactly what she said. It is easier to meet with them out of session in your own district, but I still recommend going, walking the halls, going in their offices. First of all, if you show up, if you don't live in Austin and you show up in your legislator's office, they're surprised. Most of the time, they're surprised that someone would drive to Austin to see them. Now, I'm still trying to see my senator after, this is what, 6 years I've been trying to actually face to face my senator, but I've seen my representatives. It's the senators that are the problem. But if anyone out here is from Houston, you've got a big senator that you need to be working on. Her name is Huffines.
I'm sorry, repeat her name, please. It cut out.
Miss Huffines, Senator Huffines. Is that how you pronounce that? Joan
Hoffman.
Huffman. Thank you. Huffman.
Yes. She's the
Joan
head of the finance committee. She's the one every time. Every time.
She
Well,
shut
we
me
had
down.
Jay Nelson did, she stalled it before.
Yes,
Senator
the last
Hoffman
two
did,
times.
so,
I'm sorry. Before that, it was Jane Nelson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, just so y'all know, it's Senator Menendez that's filed a bill for us. Representative Rosenthal has filed one for TPCA, and then Representative Martinez Fisher has also filed one. So,
So I think we got that in the chat. That's why I pulled this up, screen share real quick. Just highlighting, we've got like 3 minutes left. It kind of got good to me. I didn't realize we were going so far. But we were supposed to call it by 8. And I don't see any questions in the box. So if we can take a last minute question, that would be great. But these are TPCA's agenda items right now. We still have pending bills. So there's still folks, I've been at the Capitol today. I'll be tomorrow again, trying to get some of these other issues covered, but Canales will be filing. Rep Bryant, I don't think I have listed on here. He will be filing. Senator Menendez has filed, Representative Rosenthal has filed, and Representative Trey Martin Fisher has filed. We're also working with a veterans group, Voices for Our Veterans, this year, and we are trying to kind of piggyback creatively on some of what they're doing, asking for more time for assistance, particularly for our veterans, and then asking that veterans are placed in, that it's mandated that they're placed in air-conditioned units. And I know that feels a little discriminatory, but they served our country. And we've got to start somewhere. Solitary confinement, Rep Meza has filed a study bill for that, and we're still waiting on other bills for things like compassionate release, law parties, anything that do with medical, mental health, toxic water. We will probably have a bill coming soon for that, and the deplorable food conditions. All those things are fair game for us. And did we have a question that we could answer real quick?
no, but I did want to remind you guys the Sunset Commission's report came out and they made recommendations for TDCJ. So that's another thing that you can bring up in these offices when you're talking to the legislators.
Thanks for mentioning that. So Sunset Commission, they did have their report. Then from there, they decide who will carry the bills. We're expecting that to drop within the next week or so. Representative Canales is specifically asking for TDCJ. So, and that piggybacks onto the concept of independent oversight. We're working with TIFA on that topic. That is usually typically their bill, and we're collaborating with them to get independent oversight done. And so right now, Sharon and I will be there tomorrow talking to our legislators, asking, who's going to carry that. We know that Senator Miles has already filed, but we're looking at tweaking that bill a little bit so that we're more in line with the national standards. And I think we are all out of time. Do we have time?
There is a hand raised. There is a hand raised for Gloria.
What's our question? I don't see it in the chat. Well, you can just unmute, Gloria.
Is she allowed, do we have the option for her to unmute?
Yes, I think she can. There she goes.
To unmute.
There you go. She's good. Gloria? Gloria, you're unmuted. Did you want to ask your question? Okay, I'm not hearing her. So she's definitely unmuted.
She's asking, what about the law of parties? We got that passed, but vetoed by the governor due to, and then her question cut off.
No, law parties has never been passed.
No.
I think you're thinking second look. Some of the second lookers.
Yeah.
Well, and
I don't-
Leach's bill passed the House every time, but it doesn't pass the Senate.
Mhm.
Well, that clears that up. And I don't see her comment for some reason. Do we have time for one last question? One last question, then we're gonna let everybody go. Well, I think we answered Gloria's questions. All right, Megan, if you can pull up the slide, my slide for just a second. I just want to give people a few more resources, which is you know, finding out who I'm gonna fast forward through this. Yeah, TPCA website. We're making some changes right now, but you can check out how to contact your legislators there. We've got a lot of information about how you can get involved, and of course, we'll be having our toolkits out. We have an old draft of the toolkits on the website right now. Hopefully, in the next week or so, we'll get that updated for folks. And I think that was the last thing. Yeah, we kind of already did discussion and questions. We kind of interjected those in. So hopefully you guys found this useful. If you're already part of our group and you wanted to get more into the nuts and bolts of just how session works, we do have 2 existing trainings that you can go on and you can kind of check those out. I just really wanted to give more place for storytelling and responding to questions and giving, you know, our wonderful panelists a chance to just talk about what they experienced, what it was like for them. So we conducted things a little bit differently. So I want to, it is 8 o'clock, so we are now past, well, it's after 8, we're now past time. So I want to say thank you to everybody who joined us, especially our panelists for being super brave and coming out here and talking about the issues and what it took for them to become more involved. And hopefully that encourages you all to become more involved in the process. These people make the decisions. Okay, they make those decisions of what's happening in your loved one's life and your life. So you've got to get more involved with what's going on. And thank you to everybody who joined us. Thank you, Megan, in the back for handling the tech, and Ewa, really appreciate that. And me not doing it for a change is wonderful. And I think we are going to was there a last minute question? There we go. No, we got it all. We're just going to let everybody go and wish you all a wonderful evening. So,
Happy Valentine's Day,
Thank you,
everybody.
Dr. Dominic.
thank you, Heather.
And all y'all, Janet, Jessica,
Have a great evening.
Megan.